Hello, Xers and interwebbers. Welcome to Naive in the 90s, the podcast. I'm your host, Emily. I was a 70s baby, an 80s kid, and a 90s troublemaker. On this episode, we're going to talk about New Year's Eve. But first, a quick passage from the creative nonfiction book Naive in the 90s, now available on Amazon. January 1st, 1995, Sunday. You will never believe what Sarah and I did last night. I almost don't. It was so whacked out. Graham went with Ruby to a big old person party or something, and then she was sleeping over. Can you imagine those two partying it up with all the olds, getting funky all night long? Old freak rave. I mean, it is the two of them, and we all know how wild and crazy they can get, hooting and hollering out the car at all the men, no matter what age. Fucking crazy biddies. I love them. Well, anyways, she was out at some rager and didn't get home until like 1 p.m. today, way after I had already gotten back and showered. And Uncle Tom is in Vermont doing whatever it is he does. He won't be home for a couple more hours probably. The last thing Graham yelled out at me and Sarah was, "You can go to your party or wherever it is you're going. Just be careful, don't be stupid, and do not even think of going to New York. I mean it, girls." We just smiled sweetly and waved as the new Golden Girls took off. As soon as the car was out of sight, we grabbed our stuff. We went to meet up with this guy, Jordan. Sarah had just started working with him at the gas station. He's older, lives in Westville, and told us his buddies and him were going to go see the ball drop. Times Square! So we went to his house, smoked a J, and then picked up some wine coolers. Then we went to his buddies, and all piled into Sarah's car and someone else's and got the train. Holy shit, it was so much fucking fun. The whole train was just one big party. Every single car. We drank champagne, regular and pink, with complete strangers. We smoked bowls, J's, and blunts with faces that we had no idea where they came from. There was this one dude that looked like he was straight out of a Twisted Sister video, just yelling, "Maniac! Maniac!" over and over, up and down the aisles. We were all cheering and whooping. Dude pulled down a poster of a lion, ripped the face out, and put his own in it, and started to roar at people. Even the cops walking by were laughing. It was wild. Oh, yeah, and this Japanese, parent people were there, just being all proper and cute, smiling and laughing at everything, snapping away on their cameras. They saw my tongue ring, and no joke, they posed with me with my tongue out and had Sarah snap a picture. They're gonna go back and show their family this crazy pierced mouth girl they met on a crazy train. Going off the rails on a crazy train, and boy was it off the rails. We got to the station and decided since Graham had said not to go, and we did, the least we could do is stay away from all the TV cameras that were everywhere on the streets. Well, as soon as we got out of Grand Central, there were a few news channels filming the craziness. And what did we do? We went right up to a camera and screamed in partying joy. So much for staying away from the cameras. But she's been home for 3 hours and hasn't said a thing, so I think we're in the clear. So anyways, we all walked in the streets. They were packed. No one cared that it was raining and cold. We were all out there to get fucked up, see a big bright ball fall, bringing in all the newness with it, and washing away all the shitty. We drank, smoked, walked, got a slice of real New York City pizza. We whooped and yelled and drank some more. One of the guys, John, kissed me. He's not really my type, but hey, it was New Year's Eve and I felt really good, so why not? At one point, we were all hanging out and drinking, and a cop says to Sarah, "Throw out that bottle now. What are you, 15? His arms were crossed and he didn't look amused, but also not motivated to do anything but make her get rid of it. Well, Sarah was not having it. According to her, he was out of line. So the crazy wench just walked up to him, pointed her finger in his face on her damn tippy toes, and yelled, "I'm not 15, thank you very much. I'm 16. Jordan had to pull her away. The cop just shook his head, and I laughed and laughed. I did a real lot of that last night. It felt fucking good. I haven't felt good in some time. So we finally get to Times Square, and we're just huddled in literally the biggest fucking crowd in the entire world. John lit up a huge bat of a joint, and we all passed it around. I got it and took a big puff. Went in to take another. I look at my circle of people, and they are all wide-eyed, laughing and pointing in my direction. I was like, what? What? Sarah just burst into the biggest belly laugh and says, "Dude, look behind you." The crowd was packed in like sardines, so I had been pretty much leaning on someone the whole time. I turned around and holy fucking sheepballs, it was a fucking cop! He threw me the side eye and then continued on with the scanning of the insanity around him. I guess there were bigger fish to fry than a 17-year-old smoking a Zeppelin. Lucky me. Anyways, it seemed like within minutes of the ball dropping, the streets were already mostly cleared. Of course, there were freaks and drunks just scattered about stumbling, and tons of garbage everywhere. Streamers, hats, noisemakers, beer bottles, condoms. Like I said, everything. Once we got back to the train, I don't know why, but all of a sudden, Sarah and I were just so annoyed by the boys. Even though they were like 5 years older than us, they were wicked immature, and it had been a really long night, and just enough. We ended up moving to a different car. After all, Sarah had drove, so we knew we could get back home once we got back to Connecticut. We let them figure out how they could fit into that one tiny car they had and get back. What a fucking amazing time. We had so much fun. I hope I never forget just how much. New Year's Eve growing up was a huge deal. As kids, we got to stay up late watching the iconic Dick Clark reminisce about the past year while he threw a gigantic party with bands, singers, and performers. Celebrities would show up and chit-chat with him about how their year went, what they were doing in the upcoming year, and just to share in the moment that was New Year's Eve. Celebrations were happening all over the nation and the world, but none were as cool or seemingly relevant as New York City. Year after year, we all, and I mean we all, well beyond my family and friends, more like everyone in all of the U.S., gathered in front of our TVs and collectively waited and watched for that magical glowing ball to ring in the new year and bring a fresh start in for all of us. Up until 1994, when I abruptly moved out of my parents' house at 17, every New Year's Eve was celebrated with my parents, brothers, and usually at least one set of my aunts and uncles, along with my cousin. My grandparents also came to a few, or at least I remember my pops at 1 or 2 before his passing when I was 10 or 11. My gram came for a few years until she and her best friend, Ruby, started going out with their crew to do whatever partying they did at the senior citizens complex. For these early New Year celebrations, my mom would make a ton of delicious appetizers, including my cousin and my favorite, Vietnamese caramelized ginger shrimp. We would literally sit at the table as soon as she put it down and just start shoveling it into our faces so fast. Like nom nom nom. Like some sort of starving freaks that have never seen food before and could only eat shrimp. Like it was ridiculous. It was like almost cartoon-like. My mom and aunt would have to tell us to stop, or we would eat all of it before anyone else even knew it was at the table. We would also get that Martinelli's sparkling apple cider or grape juice, the stuff that came in champagne bottles. I didn't really think it tasted good, but my God, would I drink it feeling so cool and grown up. And of course, I posed for pictures with the bottle like I was, a big drinker. Those early New Year's celebrations were hands down some of my very favorite times and continue to be some of my very favorite memories. There was just something about those nights, Dick Clark uniting the whole country as well as my family with the promise of a clean slate and a year ahead full of possibilities. After I moved out of my parents' house and in with my gram and uncle in October of '94, I knew New Year's Eve would never be the same, and it hasn't been if I'm being completely honest. But that first year away from my family, my teen brain decided that the logical thing to do would be to go to New York City. 'Cause, yeah, my family, I was sure, couldn't care less that I wasn't home anymore. This yearly celebration would go on like I had never been part of it. But I'd be at the ball drop. I'd be where Dick Clark actually was ringing in the new year. I would be at the biggest party in the entire world. How could I be sad? How could I miss my old life if I was there? And you know what? It worked. The night I thought would be so hard because of my estrangement from my family, along with my gram having her own social life, turned out to be one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences that you know you will never forget, that will never fade from your memory, and actually be one of those things that brings a true smile to your face anytime you think about it. But seriously, what an experience! Like the book passage mentioned, Sarah and I were told not to go. We had never said explicitly to my grandmother that we were, but if my memory serves me correctly, we did talk about how Sarah's work friend was going to my grandmother, which is what prompted her to tell us not to. But we were young and fearless and obviously knew better, so we went anyways. And I would like to say here, in general, it is a smart choice to listen to the wisdom of the older generations, especially when you're a kid. Grown-ups, I would like to believe, have, or most usually have, the kids in their lives' best intentions on guiding them. And my gram 100% had the best intentions in telling us, a 16 and a 17-year-old girl, not to go to one of the largest cities for one of, if not the biggest party nights of the year. I have never been one to buck the rules. I know that sounds crazy coming from someone who has admittedly left home at 17, got in trouble for a knife incident at 16, and who definitely partied like it was the peak of the 60s. But until I was 16, almost 17, and honestly not until the unexpected death of one of my best and dearest friends, that I started questioning every part of my life and playing it safe. Before that, I was a stickler for the rules, for not rocking the boat, for being safe. But after being confronted with mortality and having the blinders of youth removed, I changed. There are a lot of moments in life that are pivotal to your growth and development, moments that change you and change your trajectory. The loss of my friend was, to this day, one of the biggest life-altering moments I have ever been through. It is truly one of those, there is the before time and the after time of the happening. A part of me died with her that day. The part of me that still believed in the magic of life. The part of me who was still hopeful and still innocent. But that is all a discussion for another episode. And actually, it will be one. In February, when two of my oldest friends will be joining me for the anniversary of her passing. But yeah, I had been a rule follower mostly due to fear of getting in trouble, fear of getting hurt or stolen or killed or whatever my mind came up with. Because I was scared of it all. I am a naturally cautious person, and having grown up in the 80s where faces of stolen kids were on our milk cartons and posters of runaways at the doors of all the stores as well as flashed on screens during the news, I always tended to err on the side of caution. I will always be so grateful that I didn't let that fear hold me back, even though logically I knew I should have listened to my gram when she told us not to go. Funny thing is, I actually never told my gram that we went. Never. Not even after I was a grown up, even decades after the fact. Like, I think she actually would have found it amusing after the fact, but who knows? The whole experience was just wild, from start to finish. What were we thinking? A 16 and 17-year-old just hopping a train with a group of 20-something guys to go to New York City at night with no real plan on New Year's Eve? As an adult, I'm like, oh my God, the amount of things that could have gone wrong. But thankfully, they didn't. It was a near perfect night of debauchery. The train, hands down, was the best part and the most amazing party I've ever been to. With each stop, it got crazier. More people packing in, more alcohol, more drugs. It was like Studio 54 or something, but on wheels. Police were on it, patrolling the cars. They were really just walking up and down the aisles. Not once did we see any of them take anything from anyone or even tell people to stop. And mind you, this was in the 90s, so pot was not even close to being legal yet. And I'm pretty sure open alcohol containers are still illegal. But nope, no one cared. Smoke filled the cars to the point that it looked like a fog machine was on, and pretty much everyone was smoking. Even the train guy who was walking through for tickets took a hit off a blunt that was being passed around while he passed through our car. It was packed, it was loud, it was so much fun. I often wonder about the cute little Japanese couple we met on the train. They weren't partaking in any of the drinking or drugging. They were just enjoying the atmosphere, snapping pictures left and right, including the one of me posing in between them with my pierced tongue just out. I wish I could see the pictures of that train and all its chaos. I can only imagine how they came out, what was captured, and how that couple's family and friends reacted. I also wonder, are those pictures in like an album? Do they look at them from time to time and smile? Do they wonder about the weird girl with a rod through her tongue? Like I wonder about them? I also kind of wish we had thought to bring a camera ourselves, even if it was just one of those disposable ones. But at the time, we were looking to carry as little with us as possible. No purses, no bags, and really not even pockets, as we were both wearing very tight jeans that really didn't hold much of anything but us. So, that is one of the things I regret most about my teen years. No cameras. We didn't have the convenience of smartphones with cameras on them, and cameras back then had film and were large and expensive. Or there were the disposable ones, but they weren't exactly small. They were smaller than regular cameras, but they were thick and just inconvenient to carry around. But man, do I wish we had brought one. But yeah, that train ride into the city was amazing and unforgettable. When we arrived at Grand Central Station, the city was already packed. Tons and tons of people were everywhere. And once we got outside, we were shocked at just how many more people there were. I don't even remember seeing any cars or traffic, although I feel like there had to be. But all I can remember are the immense amount of people on the streets. It seemed like they were just packed, not wall to wall, but building to building. It was intense. This huge crowd, some of it moved and some of it was just stationary. All of it was having a great time. Again, we were in the middle of the world's largest party, and it was glorious. It was raining, well, more like an on and off drizzle that night, but thankfully it was way warmer than an average tri-state New Year's Eve. So everyone on the street was damp, but not cold, or maybe that was just because of the alcohol. Either way, it was awesome. No need for big coats, just a sweater or flannel. I actually remember what both Sarah and I were wearing. She had a classic 90s look with lace-up boots, jeans, t-shirt, and a flannel, and I had lace-up boots. what we would call skinny jeans now, but we didn't call them skinny jeans then. And they had cutouts along the outsides of the leg with lace under them. Oh, they were so cool. A black tank top and a cropped white sweater. And of course, we both had on chokers. We were big fans of chokers. As we all walked to Times Square, we all got slices of pizza on the way and some more beer and wine coolers. By the time we got to the actual party part of the city, we were feeling really good and the crowd was insanely big. We could only get so far into the crowd. It was 100% the densest grouping of people I have ever experienced. Back to back, shoulder to shoulder. There was no wiggle room, which is exactly how and why I ended up fully leaning on a cop smoking a huge joint. Looking back, I was so lucky that officer didn't arrest me, or at the very least didn't bring me down to the station and, I don't know, call my parents, who I was very much estranged from. They would have been pissed. And I have not one doubt in my mind that they would have refused to come and get me, and I would have ended up staying in jail in New York City. So, thank goodness he literally looked the other way. When it was time for the ball drop, the crowd became this singular wave of cheering and merriment. I had never, and to this day have never experienced anything like it. It was like everyone, for those few moments, it was like we were all one cohesive, celebrating entity, that in order to live, we needed to cheer and hoot and holler. It was something special for sure. And then, almost like the magic in Cinderella, it was over. Just like that, and like magic, as soon as the crowd was breaking up, the drizzle became rain. The funny thing is, and I don't know why I didn't write about this at the time, but when Sarah and I went to the different train car than the guys we had come to New York with, it was partly because we saw a couple other guys in the other car that were super cute, more our types, and definitely closer to our own ages. And although we didn't end up talking to them, another set of guys came over and sat with us. They were actually even older than Jordan and the other dudes we had come with. And strangely, or not, I guess, Sarah ended up really connecting with one of them, and although he lived in Rhode Island, and I think it was Rhode Island. It might have been Massachusetts, but I guess that doesn't matter. But anyways, even though he was definitely older, like mid-late 20s, and was from a different state, they dated, or at the very least hooked up multiple times over the next year or so. He actually came down to our town a few times when we would get hotel rooms at our local Motel 6, which we did all of the time. If it was nice out, we would go party in the woods, but if it was cold or rainy or just whatever, we would go and get a room at Motel 6 or multiple rooms, which was always a good time. The 90s were insane, and we were insane with them. And looking back, it was so irresponsible and dangerous, but my God, did we have a lot of fun. Not just this night, but so many others. Of course, as a grown-up and as a parent, I would be so upset with us, but thankfully, most of us made it through. I mean, not all of us did, but most of us. So I definitely do not condone teenage partying and debauchery now that I understand the risks and such. But at the same time, I wouldn't trade any of those experiences, the good and the bad, for anything, because those are the times that stick out and stay in my memory the most. I mean, is that bad? So yeah, that was one of the best New Year's Eves I've ever had. The only other one that comes even close was 98 into 99. My husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, and I went to a house party in Boston. We literally partied like it was 1999, and we listened to that song about 20 times in a row once that ball dropped, and rang in the last year of the 90s and the last year of the 1900s. Before I wrap up this episode, I do want to take a minute to address my Gram, who was mentioned in the book passage. It was so fun to read about my Gram and her best friend Ruby. Those two were such a huge part of my life, my whole life. They had been friends for what seemed like forever. There was never a time where those two weren't around. Even before I left home at 17 and moved in with my Gram, I spent so much time with them, like as much time as possible over her house. Many weekends and school vacations were spent at my Gram's, and actually when I moved in, it would be the third time in my life that I lived with her. I used to go on all sorts of adventures with those two. They would literally go out to run errands and get lunch every single day. My favorite part, well, now it is my favorite part, but back then it would embarrass me. But they would literally honk the horn and woo out the window and wave at every guy they drove past. As I said, back then it was embarrassing, but now I seriously love it and could just imagine myself and my best friend doing the same thing when we get to that age. Ruby was the perfect complement to my Gram. They were both such large personalities, but in different ways, and I feel so grateful to have had both of them be such significant parts of my life. Fun facts. Number 1, Ruby was the first person to ever grab my boobs. One summer on our first outing since my spring vacation, she greeted me as always and then followed it with, "Oh, look who has boobies now." And then she just reached out and, lack for a better description, just honked. And yeah, that happened. I was mortified, but she just laughed. And my Gram bought me my first pair of thongs. Like the underwear, not the flip-flops. And I had mentioned that all my friends had them, and my mom wouldn't buy me any because I was like 15 or 16. And she was like, "Well, if that's what you want, I'll get it for you. But I don't understand why you'd want that going up your crack." So, yeah, and she did. She bought me a pair. To say these two women were a huge part of who I was and who I became is a true understatement. Over the years, I would see them pretty consistently. Ruby even carried a baby picture of myself and one of my daughter, and she was also one of the few guests at my and my husband's surprise wedding. When she got older, she was moved into a local old folks' home, and my Gram and I would go visit her once or twice a week until she passed. It was a hard loss. She had been basically a second grandmother to me, and it was a really hard hit. And my Gram. She stayed one of my closest family members, if not the closest. Rarely a day went by that we didn't talk, and until I moved out of our hometown about 10 years ago, she and I had regular lunch and errand dates. She was always my biggest supporter, whether it be whatever venture I was trying, art I made, or just life in general. She was the person I knew, no matter what, would stand by me and tell me that she loved me. She was the most consistent person in my life. We unfortunately just lost her a little over 2 months ago, and even though she went peacefully, and after what she would say was a long and wonderful life, it has been gut-wrenching for me. The loss has been just exponential. So please, as we wrap up 2022, make sure to not only love your loved ones without abandonment, but be grateful for them and all of their quirks and idiosyncrasies. Life is so short and so precious, and we never know what is coming or how long we have. And with that, I think we're done with this episode. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Naive in the 90s, the podcast. I really hope you come back in 2 weeks for a new year and a new episode. For any questions, comments, feedback, or contributions to the conversation, send me a message at naiveinthe90s@gmail.com or connect with me on social media, with the handle at Naive in the 90s on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And of course, don't forget to grab your copy of the creative nonfiction book Naive in the 90s, now available on Amazon. Thank you again for joining. Hope to see you next time. Peace and love, my dudes.